Zara had killed men in 17 different ways. She had catalogued them once, in a moment of dark practicality, sitting in the back room of a tavern in Coldmere, with a glass of something that tasted like regret and a list of contracts she had fulfilled over the course of 6 years. 17 methods. Some quick. Some not. All of them effective, which was the only metric that mattered in her profession. She had never failed a contract. This was the fact that Veran Ashkale had cited when he had hired her 3 weeks ago in a candlelit room in the lower city, with his hood up and his hands folded on the table between them like a man at prayer. He had slid a leather envelope across the table, and she had opened it and looked at the contents and had not let her face change. The Alpha King, she had said. Yes, Veran had said. Aldrich Kane, she had said. Because she wanted to say the name. Wanted to make him say it back to confirm that this was real and not some elaborate test of her nerve. Yes, Veran had said again. She had looked at the contents of the envelope for another moment. The figure written on the paper inside was large enough to make her chest tighten. Large enough to mean something permanent, a house, a name, a life that did not involve candlelit rooms and leather envelopes and 17 methods. How do I get access? She had asked. Veran had smiled, and the smile had been the kind that meant he had already thought of everything. The palace is recruiting household staff, he had said, specifically a personal attendant for the king's private quarters. The position requires someone literate, discreet, and capable of managing a demanding principal. He had paused. You are all 3 of these things. In your way, a servant, Zara had said flatly. A ghost, Veran had said. Someone who moves through the most private spaces of the palace without being questioned. Someone who has access to his chambers, his meals, his daily routine. He had paused. Someone close enough. Zara had thought about the figure on the paper. All right, she had said. She had spent 2 weeks preparing, learning the particular posture of Pallas, service the downcast eyes, the efficient movements, the practiced invisibility that good servants wore like a second skin. She was good at invisibility. It was, in a sense, the foundational skill of her profession. She had studied what was publicly known about King Aldrich Kane of Duskmere, which was considerable, and what was privately known, which was harder to find, and therefore more valuable. Age 31. Alpha of the Duskmere bloodline, one of the oldest pure wolf lines on the continent, had assumed the throne at 24 following his father's assassination, a word that Zara noted without irony, and had ruled for 7 years with a reputation that could be summarized as follows: brilliant, ruthless, impossible to read, and possessed of an instinct for threat that bordered on supernatural. That last part had given her the most pause. She had taken the contract anyway. She had never failed. The palace at Duskmere was everything the stories said it was, and several things they hadn't bothered to mention. It was vast. For one, the kind of vast that was not about impressing visitors, but about containing the actual machinery of running a kingdom. The corridors were wide enough for efficiency, not ceremony, and the people moving through them moved with the focused economy of people who had actual work to do. Zara had arrived with 4 other new staff members, been processed by a woman named Dara who had the eyes of someone who had seen every kind of deception, and was mildly bored by all of them, and had been assigned to the upper household, the staff responsible for the private quarters of the king and his immediate circle. She had been given a room, a uniform, a schedule, and a list of duties that included maintaining the king's private study, managing his morning tray, and ensuring his outer chambers were prepared each evening before he retired. Close enough, she had thought. On her first morning, she had carried the breakfast tray up the back stairs and through the service corridor to the outer chamber of the king's private suite and set it on the table by the window, exactly as she had been shown. She had arranged the items precisely, had smoothed the cloth, had stepped back. And then the door to the inner study had opened, and King Aldrich Kane had walked through it, He was taller than she had expected, which was saying something because she had expected tall. Dark hair, pushed back from a face that was all hard angles and controlled expression, the kind of build that said wolf lineage without needing to say anything else broad through the shoulder, the particular physical density of a man whose body had been shaped by a bloodline that valued strength above decoration. Gray eyes that moved across the room with the automatic efficiency of someone who assessed every space they entered as a matter of reflex. Those eyes found her and stopped. Not dramatically, not in any way that would have been visible to a casual observer. The pause was a fraction of a second, a barely perceptible beat, and then his gaze moved on to the breakfast tray, and he crossed the room and sat down and picked up the report he had apparently been reading before he had come through the door. Zara had executed her exit with the practiced smoothness of a woman who had spent 2 weeks learning to be invisible, and returned to the service corridor and stood against the cold stone wall for a moment. That pause, that fraction of a second. It had been nothing. It had been the natural response of a man with a strong alpha instinct encountering a new person in his private space. It had meant nothing beyond basic territorial awareness. She was almost entirely certain of this. She went about the rest of her morning duties and told herself she was certain. The thing about working in someone's private space was that you learned them faster than any intelligence report could teach you. Zara had known this going in, had relied on it. Actually, the plan depended on proximity, and proximity meant observation, and observation meant she would understand the king's patterns within days. Where he was, when, which hours the study was occupied and which were not. When he ate, when he slept, when the guards rotated outside his outer door. What she had not anticipated was that learning him would be quite so specific. King Aldrich Kane was not what the reports had suggested. Or, rather, he was exactly what the reports had suggested, and also several things they had completely failed to mention, which in Zara's experience meant the reports had been written by people who had only seen him in public. In public, she had gathered from what she had observed, and what the other staff said in the careful, oblique way of people who worked for someone they respected and feared in approximately equal measure. The king was precise and formal and carried an authority that rearranged rooms simply by entering them. In private, he was different. Not softer, exactly, but more present. More fully himself. He moved through his own study with an ease he did not display in the council chambers, sat differently in his own chair, read with a focus that was almost physical. He made notes in the margins of his reports in a handwriting that was smaller and neater than she had expected from a man his size. He drank his morning tea before he touched his food, always, and he read 3 documents before he read any correspondence, always. And when he was thinking through something difficult, he had a habit of standing at the window, with his hands clasped behind his back, and staring at the courtyard below with the particular stillness of a man who had learned that stillness was a form of control. She knew all of this by the end of the 3rd day. What she did not know, and what was becoming a source of increasing professional concern, was whether he knew about her. It was nothing she could point to directly. He had not said anything. He had not looked at her differently than he looked at any of the other staff who moved through his rooms. He was scrupulously correct in his treatment of the household, not warm, but fair, the kind of fair that came from principle rather than from caring what people thought of him. But there was the pause on the first morning, the fraction of a second stop when his eyes had found her. There was the fact that on the 2nd morning, when she had come in to collect the breakfast tray, he had been sitting at his desk working and had not looked up, but she had been halfway across the room before she'd realized that the document he was reading was upside down. He had turned it right side up without comment while she collected the tray and left. On the 3rd morning, he had asked her name. Not unusually. Staff were sometimes asked their names. It was a mark of courtesy in a palace where the king apparently made a point of knowing who worked in his immediate household. The question itself was unremarkable. What was remarkable was that he had asked it without looking up from his work, which meant he had been aware of exactly where she was in the room without watching her, and that when she had said, "Zara, Your Majesty," he had made a small sound that was not quite acknowledgement and not quite anything else, and had continued reading. A man who did not know she was anything other than a new attendant would not have had any particular reaction to her name. She was almost certainly reading too much into a small sound. She went back to her room that evening and sat on the edge of her narrow bed and thought with the particular focused clarity she brought to professional problems. The contract required access and opportunity. She had access his rooms, his routine, his patterns were becoming familiar. Opportunity would come. She had been given no specific timeline by Veron, only the instruction that it should look natural. An illness. Something that could be attributed to the inevitable vulnerabilities of even the strongest alpha something that a thorough investigation would find unremarkable. She had the means. She had, in a small sealed case in a locked box under her bed, the specific compound that Veron's contact had provided, which was tasteless and odorless, and would, in the right quantity administered over a period of 4 to 7 days, produce symptoms indistinguishable from a particular fever that ran through palace populations every few years. Plausible, untraceable, she had carried out more complicated plans with less access. There was no reason to feel that anything was wrong. She felt, with the bone-deep instinct of someone who had survived 6 years in a profession where instinct was frequently the difference between walking away and not walking away, that something was wrong. On the 4th morning, she carried the breakfast tray up the back stairs and through the service corridor and set it on the table by the window and turned to find the king standing 3 feet behind her. She did not startle. Startling was a thing she had trained out of herself years ago. She did, however, go very still. He was looking at her with those gray eyes that gave nothing back, and she looked at him with the calm, blank face of a palace attendant who had been surprised by her employer and was waiting to understand what was required of her. "You move quietly," the king said. "Part of the job, Your Majesty," Zara said. He looked at her for a moment. Then, he said, with the same even tone he used for everything, "Where did you work before Dusk Miri?" "A private household in the eastern provinces," Zara said. The answer was prepared. The history was constructed. She had spent a week building it. "Which household?" he asked. She told him. He nodded, as if this confirmed something rather than as if he was receiving new information, and then he turned and went back to his desk and picked up his report and began to read. Zara collected the empty cup from the previous evening, the one task she had not yet completed, and left the room with smooth, unhurried steps. In the service corridor, she stopped. He had asked where she had worked before, not who she was or why she was here, or anything that would suggest he knew anything. But he had asked in the tone of a man confirming something he already knew. Zara walked back to her room and sat down and began, very carefully, to reconsider her timeline. She decided to move faster. This was, she recognized, a departure from the original plan, which had relied on patience and the slow accumulation of access and trust. Patience was usually her greatest professional asset. She did not rush. She had never needed to rush, but patience assumed that time was neutral, that more time meant more opportunity rather than more exposure. And something about the way the king had said, which household in the tone of a man consulting an internal record he had already compiled, was making time feel considerably less neutral than usual. She needed to be faster. And she needed to be certain she was not doing what she suspected she might be doing, which was allowing instinct shaped by 6 years of high-stakes professional experience to be overridden by the specific quality of a man's voice when he asked a logistical question. She was not someone who let voices affect her professional judgment. She was going to be very brisk and efficient about this, and it was going to be over within the week. On the 5th morning, she arrived earlier than usual. The study was empty. The king was not yet through from his inner chamber, which was unusual. She moved to the breakfast table and began her arrangement of the tray with quick, practiced movements. And while her hands were busy, her eyes moved across the room the way they always did, cataloging, noting, measuring distances and angles and sight lines in the automatic way of someone for whom spatial awareness was professional survival. The window. The desk. The door to the inner chamber. The door to the outer corridor. The cabinet on the east wall that she had not been able to open yet because it was locked, and the key was on the ring the king kept on his person. She had been thinking about that cabinet. The door to the inner chamber opened. Zara was standing at the breakfast table with her back to the door, her hands arranging items she had already arranged. She heard him come through the door and cross the room, and she did not turn around, which was correct. Staff did not turn to watch the king enter rooms. They completed their tasks and withdrew. She heard him stop. Not at the desk. "Closer, you're here early," Aldrich said, from approximately 4 feet behind her. "I wanted to ensure everything was prepared before your morning meetings, Your Majesty," Zara said. Her voice came out even and unhurried. "Consider it," he said. He said nothing else for a moment. She continued adjusting items that did not need adjusting. The silence behind her had a quality she was trying not to analyze. "Zara," he said. She turned, because not turning when addressed directly would be strange. He was standing with his arms crossed, looking at her with an expression she had been cataloging since the first morning and still could not fully read. It was not suspicion, exactly, or it was not only suspicion. There was something else in it. Something that was either curiosity or the professional cousin of curiosity, which was assessment. "Yes. Your Majesty," she said. "You're very efficient," he said. "I try to be," she said. "You're efficient in a particular way," he said. "You note exits when you enter rooms. You position yourself so that your back is never fully to a door. You move through spaces as if you are measuring them." Zara looked at him steadily. "I was trained by a very particular housekeeper," she said. She had strong opinions about spatial organization. Something shifted in his expression. Not much. A fraction. The shadow of something that might, on a different face, have been amusement. "I'm sure she did," he said. He unfolded his arms and moved to the desk and sat down and picked up the first of his morning documents. Zara completed her task and withdrew. In the corridor, she walked at exactly the pace of someone who had no reason to walk at any other pace, and did not allow herself to think about the fact that he had just described, precisely and without apparent alarm, 3 of the most fundamental behavioral habits of her actual profession. He had described them, and then he had sat down and picked up a document. He knew. She was now operating on the assumption that he knew. The question was what he intended to do about it, and why he had not already done it, and what possible reason a man with the authority and the physical capability to have her removed from his presence permanently would have for not doing so when he had apparently known since the first morning. She spent the day executing her regular duties with impeccable calm and thinking about this problem from every angle she could find. She returned to her room that evening and opened the locked box under her bed and looked at the sealed case inside it, and thought about the locked cabinet on the east wall of the study, and thought about the fraction of a second pause on the first morning and the upside-down document on the second morning, and which household on the fourth morning, and the particular thing that had been in his expression this morning that she still could not name. She locked the box and put it back under the bed. She needed information she did not have, and the only person who had it was the king himself, who knew what she was and had said nothing, who had come through his door each morning and looked at her with that unreadable expression and asked her careful, precise questions, and then picked up his work as if nothing in the room required urgent attention. Zara sat on her narrow bed and admitted to herself, with the clean honesty of a professional examining a situation without sentiment, that she had never encountered anything like this before, and that she had absolutely no idea what to do next. On the 6th evening, the king spoke to her. Not in the incidental way he had spoken to her before: the name, the questions, the observation about her spatial habits. This was different. She had come to collect the evening lamp, the last task of her day, in his outer chamber. And he had been at his desk still working, which was apparently normal for him based on what the other staff said about his hours. She had expected to complete the task in silence and withdraw. Instead, he had said, without looking up from the document he was annotating, "Sit down." Zara had looked at the chair across from his desk. "Your Majesty?" she said. "Sit down," he said again, still not looking up. "I have something to finish, and then I want to ask you something. You may as well be comfortable while you wait." Zara sat down in the chair across from his desk, with the composure of a woman who sat in the private studies of the men she had been contracted to kill every day of her working life and thought nothing of it. She waited. He finished what he was writing with the small, neat handwriting she had noticed on the first day, blotted the page, set it aside. And then he looked up at her with those gray eyes, and she looked back at him, and the study was quiet, except for the fire. "How long have you been doing this?" he asked. The question was general enough that she could have taken it several different ways. She did not take it several different ways. She understood, with the clarity of a conversation that had already been happening beneath the surface of every interaction they'd had for 6 days, exactly what he was asking. 6 years, she said. He absorbed this without any visible reaction. "How many contracts?" he asked. "I don't keep count," Zara said. "That many," he said. "Yes," she said. He was quiet for a moment, looking at her. "Who hired you?" he asked. "I don't give names," she said, "even in conversations like this one." Something moved through his expression. Even in conversations like this one, he repeated, and his voice had a quality she hadn't heard in it before, something that wasn't quite dry but was adjacent to it. "You knew," Zara said. "From the first morning." "Yes," he said. "Why didn't you have me removed?" she asked. He considered the question in the way he considered everything fully and without rushing, "Because removing you would not have ended the contract," he said. "Whoever hired you would have found someone else, someone I would not have identified as quickly." He paused. "You're very good," he said, and it came out factual rather than complimentary. "Better than anyone I've encountered in this role. You made 3 mistakes in 6 days. Someone less experienced would have made 30. Zara looked at him. "What were the 3? She asked, because she genuinely wanted to know. He told her. The first she had been aware of, the second she had suspected, the third she had not known about and filed away immediately with the grim professional satisfaction of someone cataloging a lesson. "So you kept me here," she said, "as a known quantity." "Yes," he said. "And now?" Zara asked. He looked at her across the desk in the firelit room. "Now," he said, "I'd like to have an honest conversation, which I recognize is a somewhat unusual request given the circumstances." "Somewhat," Zara agreed. The corner of his mouth moved, not quite a smile, the ghost of one. She had, she realized, been cataloging his expressions the same way she cataloged rooms, and she had a growing library of these micro-expressions that almost never resolved into the things faces were supposed to do. "Who sent you?" he asked again. Not the name, the type, the category of person. Zara looked at him steadily. "Someone who benefits from instability," she said carefully. "Someone with resources and access to certain professional networks and a specific political problem that they have decided to solve in a specific way." Aldrich was quiet, looking at the desk. "Ashkeley," he said. Zara kept her face still. "You didn't confirm it," Aldrich said. "But you didn't correct it." "I told you I don't give names," Zara said. "You told me you don't give names," he agreed. He looked at her with an expression that was doing several things simultaneously, and she could read most of them now: assessment, calculation, and underneath both of those, something that she did not have a professional category for and was therefore uncomfortable with. "Why are you still here?" he asked. "You know that I know. You could have left." "I considered it," Zara said honestly. "And?" he said. Zara looked at the fire for a moment. "And I wanted to understand," she said. "Why you said nothing. What you were doing. What this conversation was going to be." She paused. "I don't like operating without information." "Neither do I," Aldrich said. They looked at each other across the desk, and the fire crackled, and the palace breathed quietly around them, and Zara thought that she had been in a significant number of strange professional situations across 6 years, and this was the strangest by a considerable margin. "What do you want?" she asked. "From this conversation. From me." Aldrich was quiet for a moment. "I want the name," he said. "Not tonight. I'm not going to get it tonight, and I know that. But I want to understand what it would take." He paused. "And I want to make you a different offer." "A different offer," Zara repeated. "Yes," he said. "You want to hire me," she said. He looked at her steadily. "I want to keep you close," he said, "where I can see you, and where you can see me. Under circumstances that are mutually understood." He paused. "And I want to know who sent you, eventually, when you decide to tell me." Zara looked at him. "And if I never decide to tell you?" she said. "Then we'll have many interesting evenings in this study," Aldrich said. And the ghost of a smile was back, "and I'll find another way." Zara sat with this for a moment. "All right," she said. The arrangement that followed was not like anything Zara had experienced before, which she kept having to remind herself of in order to explain why it kept catching her off guard. She remained in her position. On the surface, nothing changed. She still carried the morning tray, still maintained the outer chamber, still moved through the service corridors in the dark uniform of palace staff. The other attendants noticed nothing different. Why would they? The work was the same work. What changed was the evenings. Every evening, after the last of her official duties were complete, there was a knock on her door, not a guard, not a summons, just a knock. And she would know from the particular even spacing of it that it was Aldrich himself, and she would put on her jacket and follow him back to the study where the fire was lit, and they would sit on opposite sides of his desk, and he would talk to her. Not interrogate. Talk. This had surprised her most. She had expected interrogation. She was good at resisting interrogation. It was one of the foundational skills of her profession. What she was considerably less prepared for was a man who asked her questions and then actually listened to the answers, who offered his own observations without apparent agenda, who talked about the governing of a kingdom the way she had sometimes heard craftsmen talk about their work, with the specific, detailed attention of someone who cared about doing it well for its own sake. "The Ashkale family has 3 legitimate political grievances," Aldrich said on the second evening, looking at the fire with his hands loosely clasped. "I'm aware of all 3. I've been attempting to address 2 of them through channels that are slower than they should be." "And the third?" Zara asked. "The third," Aldrich said, "is not a grievance so much as an ambition. They want the northern trade routes under their direct control, which they cannot have." "Because?" Zara said. "Because the northern trade routes feed 12 settlements that are not affiliated with any major family," Aldrich said. "If Ashkale controls them, those settlements become dependent on Ashkale's goodwill, which has historically been in short supply." Zara looked at him. "You've thought about this extensively," she said. "I think about everything extensively," Aldrich said. "It's a quality that is either an asset or a personal failing depending on the hour." Zara found, to her professional embarrassment, that she almost smiled at this. She did not smile. She was maintaining very clear boundaries around smiling. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked instead. "The political situation. The Ashkale grievances. You're telling me things that would be useful to the person who hired me." Aldrich looked at her steadily. "Yes," he said. Why? Zara said. Because you're not going to tell them, he said. Zara looked at him. How do you know that? She asked. I don't, he said. But I think you're someone for whom information given in a particular context stays in that context. And I think the context we have established, he paused, is its own context. Zara sat with this. That's a significant assumption about someone you've known for a week, she said. I know, Aldrich said. I'm making it anyway. She looked at him across the firelit desk at the gray eyes that were always doing more than they showed, at the jaw that held tension the way some people held their breath, at the hands that were still and controlled even when he was saying things that were anything but controlled in their implications. You're not afraid of me, she said. Should I be? He asked. Most people in your position would be, she said. Most people in my position, Aldrich said, would have had you arrested on the first morning. I chose a different approach. Why? Zara asked. It was the question she kept coming back to. He was quiet for a moment. Because afraid is not useful, he said, and because he stopped. Started again. Because you walked into this palace to do something very difficult and very dangerous, and you did it with a competence and a self-possession that I found another pause. Interesting, Zara thought. The Alpha King had found her attempt to assassinate him interesting. I don't know what to do with that, she said honestly. Neither do I, Aldrich said, but I find that's becoming a familiar feeling in these conversations, so I've decided to continue having them. Zara looked at the fire. Outside the study windows, the palace grounds were dark and still. The compound I was given, she said. It came out before she had entirely decided to say it. Aldrich went still. It's in a locked box under my bed, she said. It has been there since the first day. I haven't moved it. She paused. I want you to know that. He was looking at her with an expression she had not seen on his face before. It was not the assessment expression or the calculation expression or the almost smile expression. It was something quieter and more serious, and she could not name it. I know, he said. Of course he knew. He had probably had her room checked while she slept. You could have had it removed, she said. Yes, he said. You left it there, she said. Yes, he said. She looked at him and he looked at her, and the fire was between them and the question of why was between them too, and neither of them answered it, but it sat there in the warm room like something that was going to need answering eventually. Good night, Your Majesty, Zara said, and stood. Good night, Zara, he said. She walked back to her room and sat on the edge of her bed and put her hand flat on the floor above where the locked box sat and thought about a man who knew everything and had done nothing and kept talking to her anyway. She sent Varan a message on the 8th day. Not a report. She had sent nothing reportable since her arrival, which Varan would be noting with increasing impatience. What she sent was a brief, careful message in the code they used for operational complications, which said essentially that the timeline had shifted and she required more time and that he should not contact her directly. She dropped it with the courier at the lower gate and walked back to the palace through the cold morning air and thought about what she was doing. What she was doing, examined honestly, was buying time. Time for what? She was less clear on. Time to complete the contract, which had not advanced in 8 days. Time to understand the situation better before she acted. Time to have more evenings in the study with a man who talked to her like she was a person rather than a problem. That last one, she told herself firmly, was not a legitimate professional reason. She was back in the outer chamber arranging the morning tray when Aldrich came through from the inner study and stopped, as he sometimes did now, to look at her in the way that had stopped being alarming and become something she did not have a satisfactory word for. You sent a message, he said. Zara looked at him. You had me followed, she said. I had the gate watched, he said. Yes, she nodded. To Varan, she said. There was no point in not saying the name now. It was not the name he had asked for, it was not the name of who was behind Veron. The name that would actually matter, and offering it voluntarily felt like the appropriate acknowledgement that she understood what kind of conversation they were in. Something shifted in his expression. "You're giving me that," he said. "It's a small name," Zara said. "He's an intermediary. He doesn't matter." "What did you tell him?" Aldrich asked. "That the timeline had shifted," Zara said. "That I needed more time." Aldrich looked at her steadily. "More time for what?" he asked, and his voice had something in it carefully neutral, the neutrality of a man who has a stake in the answer and is not going to show it. Zara looked at him. "I don't know yet," she said, which was honest. He absorbed this, nodded once, went to his desk and sat down and picked up the first of his morning documents, and Zara completed the arrangement of the tray and withdrew, and stood in the service corridor and breathed. She did not know yet. That was true. She had been in this palace for 8 days, and she had arrived with a contract, and a clear objective, and a locked box under her bed, and she had not moved toward any of it in ways that were not reversible, because something was making her not move, and she was beginning to understand what. The something was him. Specifically, who he was when no one was watching him perform being a king. The man who made small, neat notes in margins and drank his tea before his food and stood at windows with his hands behind his back and talked to her in the evenings like she was the only other person in the palace who would understand what he was saying. Which was absurd. She had been hired to kill him. She had a compound under her bed. She had a professional record of perfect completion. She admitted to herself standing in the cold service corridor, the bone-deep certainty that she was not going to use the compound. Had it, if she was honest, since approximately the 3rd evening. The question of what she was going to do instead was the question she had been refusing to ask herself directly. She asked it now. She still did not have a satisfactory answer. That evening she arrived at the study at the usual time and sat in the chair across from his desk, and he looked at her with the gray eyes that always seemed to be doing more than they were showing and said, "You're thinking about something." "I'm always thinking about something," Zara said. "Something specific," he said. "Something you're not going to say yet." She looked at him. "Have you considered," she said, "that you are unusually good at reading people for someone who governs a court full of people who specialize in not being read?" "Yes," Aldrich said. "It's occasionally useful. More often it's just isolating." Zara looked at him. He said things like this, plain, direct things about the texture of his actual experience with the matter-of-fact quality of someone who had stopped bothering to protect himself from the truth of his own life. It was, she had decided, one of the most disarming things she had ever encountered. And she had encountered a significant number of disarming things across 6 professional years. "The contract," Zara said. Aldrich went still. "I'm not going to complete it," she said. The silence that followed was the kind that had weight. "Why?" he said, and his voice was very even. Zara looked at the fire. "Because I'm not someone who makes mistakes in professional judgment," she said, "and completing it would be a mistake in professional judgment. That's a professional reason," Aldrich said carefully. "Is it the whole reason?" Zara looked at him, at the careful neutrality in his expression, and the thing underneath it that he was not showing. "No," she said. He exhaled. A long, slow, controlled exhale that she recognized now as what he did when something had landed somewhere significant. "What do you need?" he said. "To make this official. To make you safe. Whatever you need from me." "The person behind Veron," Zara said. "If I give you that name, I become a liability to them. I need to not be a liability." "Done," Aldrich said immediately. "You don't know what that will require," Zara said. "It doesn't matter," he said. "Done." Zara looked at him and felt something shift in her chest that she recognized, reluctantly and without enthusiasm, as the feeling of trusting someone. She had not trusted anyone in 6 years. She gave him the name. The name was Lord Kalen Drest. Aldrich received it with the stillness of a man who had suspected and was now confirmed, which told Zara that the intelligence had existed in some form before she said it aloud that she had given him the final piece rather than the first one. He sat with it for a moment, looking at the desk, and she watched the particular quality of his thinking, which she had learned by now, the slight focusing of his attention. The stillness that meant things were being organized and assessed rather than felt. How much does he know? Aldrich asked. About what's happened here, what you've reported. Nothing useful, Zara said. I've sent one message in 8 days. Operational delay. No details. He nodded. He'll be moving toward a contingency, he said. If you don't complete the contract within a certain window, he'll assume the approach has been compromised and he'll shift to something else. Yes, Zara said. Which means we have a limited time before whatever he shifts to becomes active, Aldrich said. Yes, Zara said again. He looked at her. You've been thinking about this longer than tonight, he said. Since the 5th day, she said honestly. Something moved across his face. You decided on the 5th day, he said. I began deciding on the 5th day, Zara said. Deciding takes longer than beginning to decide. He was quiet for a moment. What happened on the 5th day? He asked. Zara thought about the 5th day. She thought about him standing at the window with his hands behind his back and the pale morning light on his face, and the document about the 12 settlements that had nothing to do with her and the care with, which he had spoken about people who were not powerful enough to be. Worth caring about if you were the kind of person who only cared about power. You were reading a report about water access in the border settlements, she said. You had made notes in the margins about 3 different potential solutions ranked by cost and implementation time. Aldrich looked at her. That's what decided you, he said. It was one thing, Zara said. He was quiet for a long moment. Zara, he said. Yes, she said. What do you want to do? He said, after, when this is resolved. What do you want? Zara looked at the fire. It was a question she had not allowed herself to think about in 6 years, because the answer had always been the same: complete the contract, take the money, find the next one, and the money had always been the answer to what comes after, because enough money meant eventually there was no next one, and then she would think about after. I don't know, she said, honestly. Then, stay, Aldrich said. She looked at him. Not as an attendant, he said, and not as he paused. Not under any of the categories that currently exist for your presence here. Stay because we need to deal with Drest, and because after that is dealt with you will need to be somewhere, and I would prefer that somewhere to be here. Zara looked at him carefully. Why? She said. He held her gaze. Because you are the only person in this palace who walked in knowing exactly what I was and decided to stay anyway, he said. Not because of what I represent or what I can offer or what position it creates. Just stayed. He paused. That is very rare. Zara looked at the man across the desk who had known what she was from the first morning and had opened his study to her every evening and talked to her like she was the only other person in the building worth talking to. You're not afraid of what I am either, she said. No, he said. Why not? She asked. He considered this seriously. Because what you are, he said carefully, is someone who is very good at something that requires exceptional judgment and nerve and the ability to read situations that most people cannot read. And someone who, when given full information and time to make a genuine choice, made a choice based on something other than the contract. He paused. That tells me more about who you are than the 6 years do. Zara sat with this. I need to think, she said. I know, Aldrich said. About Drest, she said. Yes, he said. And? She looked at him, and other things, she said. He nodded. The almost smile was there, the one she had catalogued extensively, and still found unsettling in its effect on her. "Good night, Zara," he said. "Good night," she said, and did not add the title, the way she had stopped adding it somewhere around the fourth evening without deciding to. He noticed. He always noticed. He said nothing, which was how she knew. Drest moved on the 11th day. Zara knew, because she had maintained a line of awareness into Veron's network through a contact of her own, a separate thread entirely from the contract, a personal insurance she kept running in every long operation. The message came back to her in the early morning, coded in the secondary system that no one but she knew existed, and she decoded it in her room by the narrow window while the palace was still half asleep. Veron had been contacted. A new approach was in motion. The nature of the approach was not specified in what she had received, but the timeline was 3 days. She went directly to the study. Aldrich was already there, which was not surprising. She had learned that he was rarely not already there. He looked up when she came through the door without knocking, which she also did not do anymore. And he read her face with the same efficiency with which he read his morning documents. "Tell me," he said. She told him. He listened without interrupting, which was his way, and when she finished he was quiet for a moment with the focusing stillness she recognized as active thought. 3 days, he said. "At most," Zara said. "Possibly less." "What form?" He said. "I don't know the specific approach," she said, "but Drest prefers direct methods when he pivots. He's not a subtle man, he uses subtle intermediaries because he has to. When he acts directly, he prefers blunt." "Violence," Aldrich said. "Yes," Zara said, "against you or against something that destabilizes you." Aldrich was quiet. "There's a council session in 2 days," he said. "Full attendance, every major family representative." "That would be the target," Zara said. "Not you specifically, the session. Something that creates chaos and removes the ability to respond in an organized way." He nodded. He was already thinking 3 steps ahead. She could see it in the way his eyes had gone slightly unfocused, the internal architecture of a plan assembling. "I need you to contact Veron," he said. "Tell him the contract is complete. Or close enough to complete that his timeline is satisfied." Zara looked at him. "If Drest believes the contract is complete, he'll pause the alternative approach," she said. "Long enough for you to move on him." "Yes," Aldrich said. "And if he verifies?" Zara said. "He can't verify," Aldrich said. "Not quickly. The only verification available to him is whether I'm still functioning, which I will be." "He'll suspect," Zara said. "He'll suspect," Aldrich agreed. "But suspicion buys us time, and time is what we need." Zara looked at him. He was fully operational now, all the personal quality of their evenings replaced by the precise efficiency of someone managing a crisis. And she found it neither less nor more interesting than the evening version, just different. Another angle of the same person. "You trust me to make that contact correctly," she said. He looked at her steadily. "Yes," he said. "Why?" She said, because she kept asking this and kept finding his answers genuinely informative. "Because you've had 11 days to do something other than what you've done," he said. "And you've done what you've done instead." He paused. "Trust is a conclusion, not an assumption, I've concluded." Zara nodded. "I'll send the message this morning," she said. She turned to go. "Zara," he said. She turned back. He had stood up from the desk, which he did not usually do mid-conversation. He was looking at her with the expression she still did not have a name for, the one that was not assessment and not calculation, and not the almost smile, the one that appeared occasionally in the evenings when she said something true and he received it. "Be careful," he said. Today, making the contact. After, Zara looked at him. "I'm always careful," she said. "I know," he said. Be careful anyway. She held his gaze for a moment. Something moved in her chest that she did not examine closely. You too, she said. She made the contact through Verone's secondary channel by mid-morning. The message was brief and coded, and said what Aldrich had asked it to say. She dropped it and walked back through the palace grounds in the cold air and thought about 3 days, and what would need to happen in 3 days, and what would happen after. After was a thing she had started thinking about. This was new. She had not thought about after in 6 years. That evening she came to the study and sat down and looked across at him, and he looked across at her, and neither of them said anything about the message or about Drest or about the 3 days. They would manage those things, and then they would be managed. What happened in the study in the evenings was a different category. Tell me something, she said. What kind of something? He asked. A true one, she said. He looked at the fire for a moment. I've been alone for a long time, he said. I knew that before you arrived. I had made a kind of peace with it, or I thought I had. I told myself it was the nature of the position. He paused. I understand now that I had simply stopped noticing it. Zara looked at him. What changed? She said. He turned his gaze from the fire to her. You walked in, he said simply. The room was very quiet. I was going to kill you, Zara said. It seemed important to say clearly. I know, Aldrich said. You didn't. No, she said. That matters, he said. The didn't matters more than the going to. Zara sat with this for a long moment, the fire between them and the truth of 11 evenings sitting in the room with them. Tell me something true back, he said. She looked at him. I've been doing this for 6 years, she said. I've never once wanted to stay anywhere. She paused. I want to stay here. The silence that followed was the warm, full kind. Drest made his move on the morning of the second day, not the council session. Either the false message had shifted his timeline, or his intelligence had changed, or he had simply been less patient than anticipated. What he moved on was closer and more personal, and Zara understood it the moment she heard the sound in the corridor outside the study. She heard it, because she had been coming up the back stairs with the morning tray, and she was 2 turns away from the outer chamber when the sound reached her, not loud, not alarming on its own. The kind of sound that most people's ears would have organized into something ordinary. But Zara's ears were not most people's ears, and what she heard was the specific configuration of sound that meant there were people in a space who were working to not be heard. She set the tray down on the floor of the corridor without making a sound. She moved. Through the back passage she knew about because she had spent 11 days learning every passage. Through the secondary entrance to the study that was not on any staff routing she had been officially given, but that she had found on the 4th day during one of her spatial surveys, and she came through it and into the study at the same moment that the outer door came open. 2 men, neither in palace uniform, both moving with the quiet, intentional speed of professionals, which Zara recognized from the inside. Aldrich was at his desk. He had heard them too. She could see from the particular quality of his stillness that he had heard them and was assessing. His hand was moving toward the right side of the desk. She knew from her own catalog of the room that there was a drawer on the right side of the desk. She did not let him need the drawer. What happened next was fast and efficient, and she did not think about it because thinking about it was how you slowed down, and she moved across the room with the practiced speed of someone for whom this specific type of situation was the other half of her professional competency, and it was over before either man had fully registered that there was a third person in the room. Neither of them was dead. She had made a choice about that somewhere in the 2 seconds of the whole thing. The silence afterward was absolute. Zara stood in the center of the study and breathed, and did not look at her hands. Aldrich was on his feet. He was looking at her with an expression she had never seen on his face before. Something that had blown past, controlled into something raw. Are you hurt? He said. No, Zara said. He crossed the room in 3 steps, and his hands were on her face before she fully registered he was moving, his palms against her jaw, his gray eyes moving over her face with an intensity that was nothing like the assessing look she knew. "Aldrich," she said. "Are you certain?" he said. "I'm certain," she said. He did not step back. His hands stayed where they were, slightly too warm, slightly too careful, and she looked up at him from inside the frame of his hands and thought that she had never once in 6 professional years allowed herself to be inside anyone's careful hands. "You came through the secondary entrance," he said. "Yes," she said. "How did you know about it?" He said. "Day 4, she said. "Spatial survey." Something that was not quite a laugh moved through his chest. Not the ghost of one, an actual one, surprised and unguarded, the kind she had heard only twice before and found disproportionately affecting both times. "Of course," he said. His hands were still on her face. She was aware that she should probably say something practical about the 2 men on the floor of the study and about Dressed, and about the next steps that needed to happen now that this had happened, and she was going to say all of those things. In a moment. "Zara," he said, and her name in his voice had a different weight than it had ever had before. All the evenings were in it. "Yes," she said. He looked at her for a long moment, with the expression she still did not have a name for, and had stopped trying to name. "Thank you," he said. And the way he said it meant something much larger than the 2 words. "You're welcome," she said, which also meant something much larger than those 2 words. His forehead came down to rest against hers, and they stood like that in the silent study with the fire going and 2 unconscious men on the floor between them and the morning light coming through the windows, and Zara thought that this was possibly the strangest and most specific situation she had ever been in. She was not unhappy about it. Dressed was arrested before the council session. Aldrich had moved on him within hours of what had happened in the study quickly, cleanly, with the particular efficiency of someone who had been building toward a specific action and had simply been waiting for the right moment to execute it. The evidence Zara had provided, combined with what his own intelligence had already assembled, was sufficient for a formal proceeding. Varen was picked up the same day. The 2 men from the study were in custody and talking, because men in custody without Dressed's protection tended to talk. Zara watched all of this from her now unofficial position of someone who existed in the palace in a category that had not yet been formally defined, and found that she had opinions about all of it which Aldrich occasionally asked for, and which she gave without managing them first, which he appeared to actively prefer. The council was complicated about her. She had gathered this from Lady Fenrith, who had introduced herself 3 days after the study incident, with the directness of someone who had decided that directness was the most efficient approach to a confusing situation. "You're the assassin," Lady Fenrith had said, sitting down across from Zara in the corridor outside the library where Zara had been reading. "Former," Zara had said, "former," Lady Fenrith had repeated, with the tone of someone filing information. "And currently?" "Unclear," Zara had said honestly. Lady Fenrith had looked at her with sharp eyes that reminded Zara of someone taking accurate measurements. "He talks about you," she had said. "Aldrich, which he does not do about people. In 11 years I have not heard him reference a specific person in general conversation unless the reference was administrative." "What does he say?" Zara had asked, and had then been mildly annoyed at herself for asking. "Nothing specific," Lady Fenrith had said. "That's the point. It's not the content, it's the occurrence." She had paused. "He mentioned you had a useful perspective on the Dressed situation, and then the following day that you had made an observation about the border settlements he found worth considering, and then the day after that he asked if I had spoken with you yet." She had looked at Zara evenly. "He has never asked me if I have spoken with anyone." Zara had not known what to do with this information, and had filed it alongside all the other information about Aldrich that she had been collecting since day 1, and that now constituted an extensive and somewhat problematic internal library. She thought about it now, sitting in the chair across from his desk on what she had realized was the 14th evening, watching him work through the final documentation on the dress, proceeding with his small, neat handwriting and his habit of reading everything twice before he signed it. "Lady Fenrath came to find me," Zara said. Aldrich looked up. "I know," he said. "You asked her to?" Zara said. "I asked her if she had spoken with you yet," he said. "Which is not the same thing." "She seemed to think it was the same thing," Zara said. Something moved across his face. "Fenrath has opinions about everything," he said, "including things that are not her business." "She seemed to think this was her business," Zara said, "specifically because it involves you." Aldrich set down his pen and looked at her directly. "What did she say?" he asked. "That you mentioned me," Zara said, "in general conversation. Which is apparently unusual." He held her gaze. "I do," he said, without qualification. "Why?" Zara said. "Because you're in my head," he said plainly. "You have been since the first morning. I've grown accustomed to not pretending otherwise." Zara looked at him. She had grown accustomed to the directness, had come to rely on it, to find the managed speech of everyone else in the palace somehow exhausting by comparison. "I need to tell you something," she said. "Tell me," he said. "I don't know how to do this," she said. Not the contract, not the professional situation. He knew she meant something else. "Whatever this is, whatever it's been for 14 evenings. I haven't done this. Any version of it. Neither have I," Aldrich said. "You're the king," Zara said. "Yes," he said. "I've spent 7 years being the king and approximately 14 evenings being a person someone actually talks to, and I know which one is more difficult." Zara looked at him across the desk that had become theirs the way the study had become theirs, the way the evenings had become theirs. "I'm not going to be easy," she said. "I'm not easy either," he said. "I have a profession that is," she paused. "Former," he said, with the exact inflection Lady Fenrath had used. Zara almost smiled. She was getting considerably worse at not smiling. "Former," she agreed. He stood and came around the desk and stopped in front of her and looked down at her the way he had in the study with his hands on her face. And she looked back up at him. "Stay," he said. "We've established you want to. I want you to. Everything else is details we can manage." "You make it sound simple," she said. "It's not simple," he said, "but it's clear. I find that clear things are easier to manage than complicated ones, even when they require more work." He reached out and took her hand, which he had not done before, and she let him, which she had not done before with anyone. "All right," she said. He brought her hand up and pressed his mouth to her knuckles, which was so unexpectedly formal and gentle that something in her chest did something she was entirely unprepared for. "All right," he agreed. Winter settled over Duskmiri in the weeks that followed, and with it came a kind of quiet that Zara had not expected. Not the brittle quiet of waiting for something to go wrong. She knew that quiet well, had lived in it for 6 years, had developed a finely tuned sensitivity to the specific texture of safety that was actually just the pause before the next complication. This was different. This was the quiet of things that had been resolved, settling into their resolved state. The deep exhale of a situation that had found its shape. Dresd's proceeding moved through the formal channels with the methodical inevitability of a legal process backed by sufficient evidence, which Aldrich had ensured it was. Veran cooperated in exchange for considerations that Zara thought were probably too generous, and said so, and Aldrich had listened to her say so and then explained his reasoning in enough detail that she had reconsidered, which she told him, which had produced one of the genuine, unguarded smiles. She was getting better at producing those. She was still cataloging them, but the catalog had become less professional and more personal, which was a distinction she was learning to make. Her position had been formally restructured. She was now listed in palace records as a security consultant attached to the king's private office, a role that had not previously existed and that Lady Fenrath had described as either unprecedented or creative depending on how you felt about precedent, and that the council had accepted with varying degrees of enthusiasm because Aldrich had presented it as already decided rather than as a proposal. Which she had told him was a good approach, and he had said he had learned it from her. She still had the room adjacent to his study. The connecting door was used more freely now. She still came to the evenings in the study, which had not changed except that the desk between them felt less like a boundary and more like a shared surface, and the conversations had expanded in ways that surprised her, not just the politics and the governance and the dressed situation, which had been the initial content, but everything. The kind of everything that accumulated between two people who had decided to be honest with each other and discovered that honesty was generative. One true thing led to another. He told her about his father's assassination. Not the official record, which she knew, but the actual version where he had been when he heard. What it had felt like to become king at 24 in the specific way he had become king. The thing it had done to his ability to trust, which he had only recently started to understand as a consequence rather than a personality trait. She told him about the first contract, not defensively and not to explain herself, just because he had told her a true thing and she told him one back, which was the pattern they had established on the 6th evening and never departed from. He did not flinch. He asked questions that were careful and specific, and showed he was trying to understand rather than to judge, which was different from every response she had anticipated when she had imagined, occasionally, what it would be like to tell someone. "Did you choose it?" he asked. "The first one. I chose the option that was available to me," she said, "which is a different thing but is the closest true answer." He nodded. What would you have chosen if more options had been available? Zara thought about this seriously. "Something that used the same skills," she said finally. "I'm good at reading situations. At spatial awareness. At staying calm when everything is moving fast. At not being visible when visibility is a liability." She paused. "I don't actually know what else that describes." "I do," Aldrich said. "Several things. We can talk about them." She looked at him. "You're already doing it," she said. "Doing what?" he said. "Finding the next practical step," she said, "before the current conversation is finished." He paused. "Is that annoying?" he said, with the particular quality that meant he was genuinely asking. "No," she said. "I find it reassuring. For reasons I don't fully understand." He looked at her with the expression she had finally named. On the 9th evening, in the privacy of her own thoughts. She had named it because she had recognized it because she knew she wore it herself, in moments when she forgot to keep her face professional, in moments when she looked at him and the 6 years of careful distance collapsed into something immediate and real. The expression was the one that said this person, and meant it with the weight of someone for whom this person was not a category they had previously believed applied to them. "Zara," he said. "Yes," she said. "Come here," he said. She stood and walked around the desk, and he stood to meet her, and she stopped close enough that she had to tilt her head back to look at him properly, which she had learned to do without the professional caution that had attended every close proximity for 6 years. He put his hand against her cheek, which he did now with the ease of something that had become natural, and she leaned into it slightly, which she did now too. "The council wants to formalize your position further," he said. "How much further?" She said. "Considerably," he said. "They're concerned about precedent and about clarity, and about various things that are really about the fact that they do not have a category for you, and categories make them comfortable." "What category would they use?" Zara said. He looked at her steadily. "The one I'd like to use," he said. "If you're amenable." Zara looked at the man who had known what she was from the first morning, and opened his door to her every evening and told her true things and listened to hers, and put his hands on her face in the study, and called her back from the corridor before she left each night, and asked, "Lady, Fenrath, if she had spoken with her yet, what category is that?" she said. He told her. Something in her chest arrived, fully and completely, at something it had been moving toward for 14 evenings. "Yes," she said. "I'm amenable." Spring came to Duskmiri, and Zara learned what it meant to stay somewhere. It was different from what she had thought it would be. She had imagined staying as a static thing, a decision made once that then simply persisted. What she found was that it was active, something you did continuously, something that required the same attention as any other skill but produced entirely different results. You stayed by showing up to the evenings in the study. You stayed by letting someone know where you were going when you went somewhere. You stayed by allowing a place to become familiar, and familiarity to become comfort, and comfort to become home, which was a word she had not used about a place in a very long time. She was learning the palace the way she had learned it in the first days, but differently. In the first days, she had learned it as a target environment exits and angles and patrol rotations. Now she learned it as a place where people lived, which was an entirely different kind of knowledge. She knew which corridor was coldest in the early morning, and which staircase had a step that caught the light wrong and looked solid when it wasn't. She knew that the kitchen staff left bread out on the long table after the evening service was finished, and that you could take a piece without anyone minding. She knew that the garden on the east side of the grounds had a bench that caught afternoon sun, and that Aldrich sometimes went there when he needed to think through something that wasn't resolving in the study. She found him there on a morning in early spring, sitting on the bench with his elbows on his knees and his hands loosely clasped, looking at the pale sky above the garden wall. She sat down beside him without asking, which was the kind of thing she did now. "Counselor Edvain," he said, without preamble. "What has he done?" Zara said. "He has written a formal objection," Aldrich said. "To the formalization. To you." "To the category." He said the last word with a slight edge that she recognized as contained irritation, the precise irritation of a man who had made a decision and was finding it being questioned by someone with insufficient basis for the question. "What grounds?" Zara said. "Origin," Aldrich said. "Profession, lack of bloodline, insufficient precedent." He paused. He used the word dangerous. Zara considered this. "He's not wrong," she said. Technically, Aldrich looked at her. "I am dangerous," she said. "That's not a slander, it's a fact. The question is whether it's the relevant fact." "It's not," Aldrich said. "I know that," Zara said. "But Edvain is going to say it, and other people are going to hear it, and you're going to have to address it directly rather than redirecting around it." Aldrich looked at her. "How?" he said. "Tell them the truth," Zara said. "Not the managed version. The actual version." She paused. "You knew what I was from the first day. You kept me close and watched and made a judgment that took precedence over the initial category. That's not a weakness in the narrative, that's the strongest possible argument for your judgment. A man who can look at the most dangerous possible situation and assess it correctly is not making a naive choice." He was quiet for a moment. "You want me to tell the council I knew," he said. "I want you to tell the council that your judgment is the thing being questioned," Zara said, "and that your judgment has been demonstrated, repeatedly, to be correct. The specific details are secondary." Aldrich looked at her with the expression she had named on the 9th evening. "You are very good at this," he said. "I know," she said. "I told you that on the first day." "You did not tell me that on the first day," he said. "I demonstrated it," she said. "Which is the same thing." He almost smiled. The almost smile had gotten considerably closer to an actual smile over the course of the winter, and she had been watching its progress with the same cataloging attention she had brought to everything about him. Except that now the catalog was not professional intelligence, but something else that she had no prior category for, and had decided simply to call what it was. "Zara," he said. "Yes," she said. He turned on the bench to look at her fully, which put them closer than the bench's width strictly required. "Are you happy here?" he asked. The question was direct and simple, and she knew from 4 months of him that the directness was the sincerity, that he asked the things he actually needed to know. She thought about the question seriously, the way it deserved. She thought about the library where she spent her mornings and the study, where she spent her evenings, and the corridor outside his chambers where she could hear him working late, and the garden bench in the morning light, and the bread from the kitchen after the evening service, and the 14 evenings that had become 40, that had become every evening, without either of them having to decide it. She thought about a man who had known what she was from the first morning and had opened his door anyway and kept opening it, night after night, until the door was simply open, and neither of them was on a particular side of it. "Yes," she said. "More than I have a prior reference point for." He reached out and took her hand the way he did now, easy and unhurried and certain. "Good," he said. They sat in the spring garden in the morning light and said nothing else for a while, which was its own language, the one they had built together over the course of a winter and all the evenings in it. The council would be addressed. Edvane would object and be overruled. The formal proceedings would proceed, and the category would be established, and the palace would adjust. The way palaces adjusted when the person who set the terms of adjustment was certain about what those terms were. Aldrich was certain. She knew this the way she knew the cold corridor, and the uneven step, and the bread on the long table after service from the inside, from having been somewhere long enough that it had stopped being new and become simply true. She was staying. She had been staying for 4 months without needing to decide it again. That, she had come to understand, was what staying actually was. That evening she came to the study and sat in the chair across from his desk, and he looked up when she came through the door with the expression she had named and never told him the name for, and she looked back at him with the same expression on her own face, which she no longer tried to manage away. He said her name. She said his. The fire was going, and the palace was quiet, and outside the study windows the last of the pale spring light was fading from the sky over Duskmiri. She was exactly where she was going to be. That, it turned out, was the whole thing.